Okay, so we're actually going to get started a little bit. So I'm Scott. I'm one of your byproduct peers. Last we spoke, I was kind of looking for my next gig, and I have started just about a month ago at Medikura as their chief product officer. Now, Medikura is a healthcare startup here in Berlin. We do basically we do side effect reporting and effectiveness on any drug reported by real patients. Super cool. It's like a database with an engagement engine. Really cool stuff. And a lot of the engagement stuff that I learned was what I learned at Babbel. And we're going to get to Babbel in just a second, because Babbel's trick was, they get people to sign up and get a subscription to language learning. And what was tricky about it is they pay for it and then they stop using it. So what we did, no matter what, was to try to get people to learn more and more and more. Now, one of the people who I worked with who was instrumental in doing that is Rachel, who's here today to tell us about creating personas at Babbel, and she's going to give us the whole story. But Rachel, we hired her in New York City. Then she got a taste of Berlin life, and I think within a year moved over to Berlin, and her whole team is in Berlin, and she's going to tell you about that. But before that, she was at Consumer Reports, which is super famous in the US for product comparisons and other types of consumer advocacy. Really great magazine and a really great business. It's a not-for-profit, of course. But now I'm going to hand over to Rachel. She'll say hi, and then she's going to start with a really great presentation. Okay, yes. So thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. Also really cool. This is the first time we're going to get to kind of share our process of building personas outside of Babbel. So a nice opportunity for us as well. Just really quickly, the team at Babbel, I lead 3 other UX researchers. We have a mix of qualitative and quantitative, and we used both of those skills in our personas journey that I will talk to you about today. So let me share my screen, get everything set up here. And maybe just give me a thumbs up when you can see personas at Babbel. Nice. Okay, so just a quick introduction about Babbel. We're a language learning app. You can learn from 14 different languages. We're a subscription model, as Scott said. We've sold over 10 million subscriptions so far, but like he said, one of our key kind of pain points that we continuously try to solve is getting people to move beyond the purchase of their subscription and into actually, engaging with learning. Just a little bit about us. We were born in 2007 in Berlin. We do have an office in New York. That's where I started. And just a really nice, diverse set of people. We've got about 60 different nationalities. So it's a fun environment. And our mission, of course, is for everyone to be learning languages. So what are personas? We'll talk a little bit about what they are and how we use them. Really, it's a shorthand for injecting a deep sense of empathy into your product teams. So they're there to personify your typical users. They communicate your users' context, their motivations, their needs, and the approaches or the behaviors they have when using your products. Why do we use personas? Well, when we're making product decisions, we want to put ourselves into our users' shoes. So focusing on what matters most to them instead of thinking how we would want the product to be, because it's probably not the typical need of your actual users. And personas are not a correlation between demographics or analytics variables. That would be like a market segmentation, for example. You correlate between demographic variables, and then you're able to target by age or income level your marketing messages. Analytics variables are more for behavioral segmentation. So who's your power user? Who's your dormant user? Things like that. Personas are rooted in a really deep qualitative understanding of the what and why behind what drives your users to use your product. And they're really used to assist in the ideation phase of your design process. So you're rooting your design decisions in specific user needs and real user problems to solve. Just an example, ours look much better than this, but maybe you've seen personas out in the wild. Usually you see a card with somebody's face and a lot of descriptors around their goals, frustrations, maybe some demographics or, tech usage that they typically have. So if you don't know anything about personas, maybe you're familiar with just seeing some artifacts like this. Getting into the methodology. So how do you go about building personas and actually deciding the kinds of personas that are right for your team? So you really have three options. There's a qualitative persona. What this will allow is for really quick discovery when you have a lot of unknowns and you're on kind of a tight time frame. It's more open-ended and a lot around discovering things you don't know. And that's typically one-on-one user interviews. On the other side is a quantitative approach. Typically, you're looking at surveys. This is when you're using a really large sample of people to validate a certain hypothesis that you have. But it doesn't really tell you that deep understanding of why you're seeing those patterns. So there's then a third option, which is mixed methods. This is when you combine the power of small sample size to get really deep and rich insights with quantitative validation to see if what you're finding in qualitative is something significant. And just a really kind of quick way that you can check what's right, what approach is right for you and your teams. If you really need empathy in a hurry, you want to make some decisions quickly, but you want to do it from a user-centric point of view, then qualitative would be a really nice way for you to go. On the opposite end, maybe your company already has a lot of information and empathy built for your users, and you need to start tying maybe personas to KPIs or to certain behaviors in your product. You might go for a strictly quantitative approach. But somewhere in the middle is really nice for a company who's made some strides in understanding who their users are, but hasn't quite gotten there. So there's not a lot of deep empathy yet, but there's also a ton of people who kind of need to be bought in to this process of using personas. And that's where a mixed methods approach is really nice, because you have the chance to get a deep understanding, but you also have kind of the credibility and validity of a quantitative approach. So you can get a lot of people on board with the data that you present. That's where we started at Babbel. This stakeholder buy-in was really key for us. We had a lot of stakeholders, product managers across many agile teams, and even people in marketing who needed to be on the same page as us. And people were aware that we needed personas, but not super sure how they would be used or how they would be useful to such a wide set of stakeholders. So that's where we started. We decided that a mixed methods approach would help us get there. And we kicked off with a lot of workshops, including our stakeholders into the conversation. So educating them about personas, how to use them, why we're using this mixed methods approach, and also getting more information from them about what they need to learn, what are their major gaps in their own knowledge of the user. And that was really our foundation for selling this mixed methods approach. Then we also needed to take a look at actually, what was the state of personas, even though we didn't really have them at Babbel. We realized actually there were some personas being used in many different teams, but they were really generated based off of gut feeling and what did we just kind of think it was like to learn a language. We also had a lot of analytics data. It's a very analytics heavy company. So we had some behavioral segmentations that told us some things, but not really a deep understanding of who these users are. And we actually did already have a lot of qualitative data from past product research. So that was really key to know what was kind of the state of what we were dealing with. And our vision for this project was really to get everyone excited about what personas can bring to their teams. Of course, the main goal is to uncover like real user problems so that we can start inspiring solutions that actually solve, what needs to be solved, and ultimately inject user centricity into our decision making. So we kind of, set the groundwork. Here's where we are. Here's who we need to talk to and get bought in. Let's kick this off. So our main task at the beginning of looking at our data was finding our hypotheses. From the data, what can we hypothesize or guess as to the key variables that differentiate our users and create these persona groups? So we looked through market research, we looked through analytics, we talked to our learning experience design team, who's very expert in how to learn a language from, a teaching perspective. And then our product research was really the key qualitative foundation to all of this. We, came up against this question, looking at all of this data. All of our learners shared a very similar goal, which seems kind of obvious, but to get conversational. But through this deep dive into our qualitative research, we came up with hypotheses for what actually differentiates them. So we use these hypotheses to build a survey. All of the questions, 23 questions long, all of them are seeking to validate which variables really differentiated groups of users. We sent to about 2,000 users in the US and Germany on web and mobile. Those are our biggest markets, and we're on both platforms. What this got us was a set of data. We performed a factor analysis. I am not a quantitative researcher. I have her with me. She's my quantitative magician, Christina. She helped design this project so that we would, come away, use a valid approach. But you can see a snapshot of it in that table where it starts to highlight, using this factor analysis, 3 segments that are significantly different from one another on these variables of attitudes towards learning, what are their barriers, what are their product needs. But this isn't super, we can't just hand this table off to a team and say hey, now here's our personas, here's some numbers. So we have to tell a story, and that's where the qualitative comes back into play to really flesh out who are these people based off of these key variables that differentiate them. So we came up with, these are our 3 segments. We added pictures so you could embody them visually. We came up with names, short little descriptors like a go-getter, aspiring daydreamer, so teams could imagine really easily what type of person this is, and quotes around their feelings about language learning. Then for each persona, we fleshed out the details. We provided a longer quote to showcase what their language learning goal is. We highlighted at the very top their attitude towards learning, so kind of how positively they felt impacted was significantly different across these personas. Then we highlighted their product needs. Some of them need more rewards, whereas some of them need more grammar, for example. We highlighted key barriers to language learning. Some of them had more accent insecurities than others, which kept them from speaking, differing levels of confidence in certain skills, things like that. And we did include at the bottom some tech and kind of demographic information, but we very purposely didn't make that the highlight, because we had to think what was the information that would best impact our decision making in our product teams. And we're a mobile first company. So maybe one of these personas is more likely to use a smartphone, and that's interesting to know, but that doesn't really change any decision we would make in prioritizing what to build. So we really wanted to de-emphasize that kind of information. Our rollout, we focused on a few things. So some kind of marketing hacks. We created little icons that people could use to react in Slack with each of these personas. They could even start kind of identifying like, oh, I'm a Devin or I'm a Gabriella. And then at the top right, you can see this is called an empathy map. So we partnered with some other experienced designers. They took the personas into their teams and they had the teams consume the data and basically I was going to say regurgitate, but that's kind of gross. Basically like say it in their own words. So consume this information about a persona and then, injecting the information, like kind of instilling an understanding of the information, if you know what I mean there. Then we actually pushed the qualitative even further. So we did another round of qualitative research, which was a diary study that allowed us to build more visual artifacts to understand the journey of each of these personas. So we mapped kind of the emotional state of each persona as they were learning a language over a longer period of time. So we tried to make sure that the artifacts were visual, clear, and people could very easily interact with the data. We saw a really big shift in the culture for sure. Over the last year, we've seen more and more teams consistently using these personas in discovery processes. So they will point to, oh, we're designing for Devin this quarter, and they point to a very specific pain point that they're working on and they're ideating solutions for. So we can really see they're embodying these personas in their teams. And what we all really want is to be able to show product impact at the end of the day. So there is, we've launched some features that are specifically designed with this process of, building empathy with your personas. This feature specifically was launched, and we did see an increase in our main KPIs, which is activity starts and completions. So that's always really nice to see that it has a real impact on the product. So I just wanted to share some specific resources for you guys. You're not necessarily researchers yourself, but at least you can put your teams in your mind and think, which method or which approach is best for me. So with empathy in a hurry, maybe you guys are a smaller team or you don't necessarily have a lot of data to begin with. You kind of need to move fast, but you want to focus on real user problems. There's a really nice book, Validating Product Ideas Through Lean User Research by Tomer Sharon, and he has a very digestible way of explaining how to come up with qualitative personas, from even just defining who's your target audience, how to recruit in relatively easy ways. And, for non-researchers, I think this is a really nice resource. Maybe you saw yourself in our story with Babbel and why we needed to go for a mixed methods approach. A larger company potentially, or you already have a lot of data and you need to start making some connections between all of it. Maybe you need buy-in from a lot of stakeholders to have the impact you want to have, or you really want to start building a strong customer-centric culture. Then mixed methods could be right for you guys. And here are the resources we used, which is the user is always right, a nice description of how to go about building personas. Measuring You, Jeff Soro has a ton of resources for quantitative research, building personas with this mixed methods approach. So he's a really good one. And then we just linked a ResearchGate article, which we used most heavily to help us through this process of a mixed methods approach. And that is our story of personas at Babbel. So thank you. I think we're gonna save for time for questions.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks very much. We've got tons of time for questions. If you're shy, you can type them in the chat. If you're not shy, raise your hand and we'll call your name. Okay, let's start with Giuseppe. You got to remember to unmute.
Hello.
Go for it.
Sorry for that. Thank you, first of all, Rachel. It was very interesting to hear about your experience at Babbel. I have two questions. Maybe I'll start with one just to leave space also to others. So my first question is about, you mentioned like doing a diary study. I'm curious to know how you did it and if you done it in person or if it was during pandemic and so you done it from home.
Yeah, the diary study piece was an add-on after we completed personas. It wasn't part of the plan to be in the personas research, but we felt that it was a really nice next step to like build really good detail into how these personas learn languages over time. So that's why it wasn't built into the process, but that's why we decided to do the diary studies for Babbel. How we did it was remotely or digitally. We just used lots of Google Sheets to manage the setup and everything. There's other tools you can use. DScout is a really nice diary study tool that you can look into. But we did for 7 days. We followed people with tasks for them to respond to us. How did you learn today? What did you do? Or maybe you didn't learn, why not? What are you struggling with? And then at the end, there's an interview so we can fill in the gaps. And the outcome was to draw those emotional journeys over time for each persona. So it was nice to do the diary study after you do personas, because then you know which people you need to recruit. Because a diary study can be very time intensive, and you need to be really sure about your audience so that you don't waste a lot of time on people who don't really match your target audience. So I don't know, does that help?
Yeah, that helps a lot, Rachel. Now, if you were to do it again, would you use DScout or would you do it with the spreadsheets that you did? And what was the reason why you chose not to use DScout?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't use DScout because we felt like we could just do it ourselves. So it's like it saves money. We had the time. I prioritized the time for my team to do it. So, we have a team of researchers of 4. So we have some energy and space to do those things ourselves.
Okay. And how long did the whole project take?
Oh, good question. I was over a year now. Christina, this is why I made her join.
Hi, yeah, I did that research and it took about 2 months in total. So it was like we had the participants stagger start. So it was about 2 weeks from first interview to final interview for everyone. Mm-hmm. And then the analysis took maybe another 3 weeks to get everything set up and put together and synthesized and then brought back to the team. So about a month and a half, 2, including setup.
Yeah. But that's for the diary study, right?
Yep.
What about for the personas?
Oh, personas took about a whole quarter. So
yeah. Because the personas, it is for any of these larger foundational research projects, you've got to plan time. First of all, to get everyone kind of on the same page at the beginning. I find those stakeholder discussions to be really, really important, but they do add some time to your process. So 2 to 3 months for any of these larger foundational projects is realistic.
Okay, we've got room for other questions. Sure, Parts.
Hey, able to hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Firstly, thanks, Rachel. Thanks for the insightful presentation. I have one question. Out of your 10 million users, like subscribed users, the personas that you came up with, what do you think is the percentage representation? So how many percentage of your user base would you say is represented by these three personas?
Yes, good question. Very product manager question that we get a lot. We were actually just talking about this with a team yesterday. So with personas, although we used a quantitative approach to validate those three segments, still personas are rooted in a very qualitative understanding of your users. So that is the lens that we take. And it's a chance for you to say like, oh, I'm a Devin because I do blah, blah, blah. So you can see yourself in a persona, and you can also kind of question your biases by seeing other personas. Now, how do we connect it to business metrics? It's a representative sample of our users, but we don't have hard percentages for, 50% are Gabriella, 10% are Devin. We present them to the teams as equally representative of our user base. And then based off of a team's goals and strategies for that quarter, they can decide, is this target audience best match to my goal for this quarter? Let's use them, and keep iterating. So we don't have exact numbers for the representativeness of each persona. Yeah.
So Rachel, I've heard a lot of people talk about jobs to be done as better than personas.
Yes.
What's your take?
Also a very interesting question, something we talked about last week. I don't know yet, to be honest. I've never used jobs to be done, but we're actually planning on doing some of that this coming quarter. I think that jobs to be done is a very different kind of, it's not product and feature focused really at all. It's more about what's the reason for somebody to employ your product, to use it. So one example is like people bought milkshakes from McDonald's in the mornings and they didn't understand why, and like what job, I forget exactly what it was, but that's the idea. I don't have an opinion on which one's better or not. For now, we use personas. We're gonna experiment with jobs to be done. Yeah, I don't know.
That's honesty for you.
Yeah.
Other questions from the group?
I think Martin has one.
Why don't we go with Martin, and then we'll go with David.
Lovely. So I have a number of questions, but I'll try to limit myself.
Okay.
So first of all, thank you for sharing your insights at Babbel. Currently, I'm in front of the challenge, but obviously we're kind of keen to understand our customer audience better and build personas. And then usually one of the conversations you usually have, you see that within marketing, you see that within product, or you see that within UX and research, this kind of stuff. To be honest, that's not my question because I don't care as long as it gets done, right? But the important question is, obviously we don't have the resources to dedicate like 3-6 months on building personas out of that. But fortunately we have at least the money to spend. So we're now looking into working with an agency to outsource that part, and then still kind of make it work within the organization, and still to basically advocate and evangelize them as part of our business. Do you have any experience on working with an agency on these kind of project? Is there anything you can recommend there, any company you can recommend, or any pitfalls you have seen or experienced in your past there?
Sure. Actually, I did investigate using an agency for this. For us, we had the opposite problem. We kind of had internal time and resources, but we didn't have a lot of the money to spend on it. So that's why we went with an internal process. Actually, Jeff Sorrow, so Measuring You, that article that I linked, he has an agency that does this work of a mixed methods approach. It's quite pricey. That's what happens when you get into the quantitative world, because you're having to pay for this large sample size. So that is a pricey approach. Otherwise, maybe then a qualitative approach is better for you guys. It would probably cost less money and take a little bit less time, and at least would give you a place to start.
Our audience is super steep, so we are dealing with wealthy individuals that are able to invest more than 200,000 euros So that like quantitative is probably not the option. So you'd go with a qualitative approach then in cases one. And then is it then any UX agency you would kind of work with, or is there anything anybody you can recommend that you seem like somebody you trust could work with?
I have one freelancer that I really like. She does a lot of really nice exploratory research. So she tells a story really well. I can share her name with you after.
Something. And then to my second question, if I may, business impact. Were you able to link it back, all your work, to some sort of business impact? And how do you keep quantifying it? Because obviously it's an investment on the whole organization. People have to buy into it, adapt to it. But the only metric in the end that counts is either users, dollars, or you name it. How do you go about that?
Yeah, so we've started, and at the end of the presentation, I kind of outlined 2 places where we're measuring impact in a way. So cultural impact, we're starting to highlight teams who are using personas in their discovery processes. So that's kind of like a researcher's way to check how
adapted, right?
Yeah, how wide is it being adapted? And then we're always on the hunt for a feature that, you know, makes an improvement in the product, and can we link it back to somebody who used the personas? So it's a little bit of a reverse story once things get launched.
Okay, great questions. Next, we're going to go with David and then on to Ali.
All right. Thanks again for the nice presentation. I also got 2 questions. One, how did you guys basically define the categories or the user basically elements, attributes that you wanted to focus on? Did you only use stuff that you already had in your database? Did you also test new attributes that might be relevant to distinguish these personas? How did you kind of pick what you wanted to ask or find differences on?
Sure. A lot of it was that desk research that we did. So looking back at our market segmentation, which was based off of one really key variable. So we knew we had to include that. Then our product research, which highlighted all of the other possible variables, basically. So, and then our stakeholder interviews. What did our stakeholders think? Some people had really strong assumptions about what differentiated users. So we wanted to make sure to include those if they were right or wrong. And any open questions they had, like maybe we could fill in the survey with a few extra questions that weren't necessarily about the personas, but they had another research question they wanted answered. So those were the past product research, market research, and stakeholder input. And then you basically write out a huge survey of any question that you think is possibly going to impact or, you know, be an important variable. And then you just have to prioritize to which ones you kind of have a sense that are going to matter based off of those 3 things.
Right, fair enough. Sounds good. Second, I mean, with so many users, it's probably easy to get high enough response rates. But did you give any best practice on rewards or benefits you gave to the people participating in the diary study or something else? Is it just basically, I don't know, premium of your product, or what did you kind of do to pay for the people participating?
Yes, so that depends by project, how much time they have to invest. With the diary study, it was quite a bit for each person, I think around $150 US dollars, because they gave us a week of their time. For this survey, maybe we gave like a free month to Babbel or something. I can't exactly remember. Typically with surveys, if it's short enough, just a few questions about a specific feature, we don't do anything and we get enough responses. But for a longer survey, maybe a month free to your product, or there's some research that shows people are more likely to respond if there's a chance to win a bigger prize. So a raffle, you could say like, we'll choose one person to get $100 to Amazon or something. Is also an option.
All right. Nice.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you. Next is Ali.
Hello. So it was interesting to me, you were talking about how you guys have users kind of across the globe, and we're facing kind of the same issue. Our product's in 9 languages and 15 countries. And so I'm curious, you mentioned not including like the demographic information as a focus. And so our struggle is that our users are so different in all of those different regions. So they're using the product in a different way. We're attracting different types of businesses. And so I was just curious with the personas, how you kind of get around that.
Yes. Again, it depends. So for us, for our team, our goal was to have a wide impact on the product. That meant we had to generalize a little bit more because when you get into the product, it's not super personalized to a specific region. There's all of the same features and you use the product in the same way. So for us, generalized personas worked better in that sense. So we chose our biggest market, which is Germany, and our most growing market, which is the US. But we do have teams like our marketing teams, for example. The way you speak to people can be very different in each country. Like what message should they hear to get them interested in the product? So they do smaller qualitative research within each market to get a sense of the way in which we need to speak to those people. So it might make sense for you to choose maybe the top 3 and start with something qualitative and just do a deep dive into each one and see if that's useful for you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. And Bastian.
Hey, thanks, Rachel, for those really great insights. It's really a pleasure to hear. And I have 2 questions. One, like connecting Martin's point earlier, do you have to put dollars on this? In my opinion, you shouldn't, because like personas are, for me, like the greatest way of making the voice of customer and like who is your user really transparent in the whole company. And this also is where my first question goes. Like, I like personas. I'd like to build personas, but also to hand them out to the different departments who could use them. I mean, of course, every PO or developer should have a clear picture of who the user is he's programming for, but also like marketing and sales should be very, very interested. And in my opinion, all should be using the same persona basis and not build their own, because otherwise you build a product and maybe have a sales or marketing message that doesn't fit to this. Yeah. How is your experience at Babbel with this, like other departments using those personas you build, and what their feedback on those are?
It's not perfect, I'll tell you that. The marketing team still does work from their market segmentation. So, and it's very like demographics heavy, like I said. So which age range should they go after? Which marketing channels do they use? What platforms are best to target people? So we haven't found a perfect answer. I would say our first goal was to at least get the product team on board with being more empathetic. So that's been our goal for the last year. Actually, we have these topics going around. How do we bridge product and marketing, market segmentations? But I don't have an answer for you right now.
Okay, fair enough. One of the motivations of doing that project too.
Yes.
Okay. Bastian, did you have a second question?
Yeah, my second question was like, in my experience, when I used quantitative research for persona building, it was always there to validate or invalidate a hypothesis that I built up from qualitative research. This was the way I have been using it. And just out of curiosity, because I think you have done much more quantitative than I have been doing, has the quantitative analysis give you any new insight, not like validating or invalidating something you already thought about earlier, but something totally new you would never have thought about before?
Something totally new. I would say it invalidated some of our previous knowledge that we thought was very true. And it gave weight to certain variables that we didn't think mattered, I guess, if I can say it that way. It wasn't like I don't know that there was anything super mind-blowing, but I don't know, Christina, if she can remember, but she turned her video off, so she's gone. But
Yeah, but I
definitely
mean,
it invalidated like a really key variable that we thought was important didn't actually turn out to be as important. So.
And then you went back and thought about what is the reason, and then you tested again, or how did you?
So I would say the diary study was a nice follow-up qualitative to that, which we didn't plan in the beginning, but yeah, was a good choice to do.
Great, thanks, Rachel.
Okay, thanks, Bastian. And Christina, was there something you wanted to add to that?
No, she muted and turned off her cam, so she's gone.
No, I'm here. Sorry. No, there's nothing I wanted to add. I just wanted you to know that I'm here. Camera.
Okay. Cool.
Teamwork. Okay, Nikhil, you do have a point.
I do. Just a quick one, maybe. I mean, we did talk a bit about the approaches on how to build personas, like quantitative, qualitative, and mixed. But when and how would you say a product organization or a company would know that now they need personas?
If you sense that decisions are being made off of an unbalanced point of view. So of course you need a business strategy and goals. You need maybe an idea of how feasible it is tech-wise. And then you also need if it's valuable to your user, if it's solving a real problem. At Babbel, it was very unbalanced. It was tech kind of first, business goal second, and the user view was silent almost. So that's what I mean when personas were being incorporated into discoveries. People were, when we asked, why are you making this decision? There was not a user reason usually. And now there is. So if you find yourself in that situation, I would say you're ready for personas.
Okay, and we have a question from David.
Hi, Rachel, and everybody else. Thank you so much, Rachel. That was super interesting. And a lot of the questions I had have already been asked, but maybe a little bit of a different focus. You ended up on 3 personas for 10 million people. My intuitive feeling would be, so we have like 7 personas and we have a lot less people. So my thinking is, did I see correctly that the 3 personas came directly from the quantitative research done? Or did you think you had 3 and you fit how the number 3, how did that happen?
Yes. Well, the qualitative is what informed all of the questions in the survey. So which variables did we think were important? And then the factor analysis is what showed us, in fact, these 3 groups are statistically different. And then Christina can take it from here.
There's some literature to suggest that 7 personas is actually too much, and in our case, we didn't want to overwhelm the designers and product managers when we had these artifacts presented to them. Like, we didn't want them to be like, which of the 7 are we designing for? So I did in the analysis something called a dimension reduction, just to look at the most important variables, and then it was really important for me to have no more than 4 personas out of this, but I wanted to err towards 3. So it was it was just what came out in the data analysis partially, and then there was also a strategic, point of view for that.
Yeah.
Perfect. That makes sense.
Yeah, Dave, then is going to be a tricky one because it's
100%.
People are going to lose track. Yeah.
100%. The issue that we have is that we have buyers and we have the users. So we've got 2 on the buyers, 3 there, and we have 2 more floating around, but I'm trying to get that number down for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say it is different for companies who are maybe B2B or aren't just solely B2C. Then I can see having slightly more. Makes sense.
Okay, but yeah. That's still really helpful. I also had the gut feeling that we need to bring it down. The second question that I had was, I lost it. I wrote too much. Right. So there was a question about resources, time, and money. And some people have time, some people have money. We have neither. And we need to basically cut down. We also have a small user group, so qualitative for sure. But what are the things you say we can't skip, and what are the things that maybe can be skipped if you're still quite small?
What can't be skipped? Good question. So putting some time into defining your target audience, so who would fit into your group already, and recruiting, I would say put a bit of time into recruiting like a good pool of people. Then what you'll want to do in the analysis is probably more of just some affinity mapping. Like you don't need to get super fancy with methods to analyze the data. And communication, I would say, like, don't go so heavy on marketing, like visual design, unless you have a designer, that really helps. But doing this empathy mapping workshop was super critical. I've seen it change teams in the matter of a week. They consume the information, they translate it for themselves, and then they're talking the next day about designing for Devon. So defining well your audience and recruiting, and that empathy mapping session at the end, I think are very important.
Thank you so much. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, we've got time for a couple more questions. All depends on Rachel's availability too. I think she's good till the end of the hour. I've got a hard stop. There's been some suggestion to move it on to Slack after that, depending on availability. Do we have any more questions where people want to raise their hand? Yeah, Part, and then was it Mike after that? Yep, so Part.
Okay, thank you. It's a second one. Sorry, I'll try to keep it short. So primarily, the question that I had is, like, normally with user audiences that are so big, like let's say 10 million plus users, there are a bunch of people who would be fine being interviewed, who would be fine being talked to, who would want to participate in surveys, let's say more the extroverts. Then you have a bunch of people who are more the introverts. And normally with such exercises, my experience has kind of shown that we end up getting the voice of only the loud customer and not just actually the voice of the customer. So how did you kind of solve for that problem with this kind of a setup?
Yeah, I think that's where the quantitative comes in nicely. It's somebody who can take a survey instead of having to raise their voice and like come talk to us in an interview. And it's a wider number of people. So we got around 2,000 responses. So we're more confident that that's a pretty representative sample. In research, you are always going to have a self-selection bias. Like there's just no way around it. We can't do, lab environment, perfectly controlled research. So it's always going to be there, but quick, shorter surveys maybe is a good option to try and get a representative look.
Mm-hmm. And then Mike had a question?
Yes, thanks for the presentation, Rachel. It's really good. I'm just curious, you've got 3 personas that are all very different, and then your product teams are using these to try and improve the use of the products. But how do they know which persona to use? Or do you have personalized features, or is it one size fits all? Because if they're all very different, like how does that then help the product teams, actually improve the use, because they're all saying different things?
Yeah. So one example from a recent round of empathy mapping, the team was like having this exact same question. They were coming at it from a point of view, they're working on a specific feature, like our speech recognition feature, for example. So they were using that lens to look at the 3 personas and think, what would we need to design for Gabriella versus what would we need to design for Devon? How do we decide? Do we need a one size fits all? All of these questions. And again, not a perfect answer, but it's something that's up to the team. So we don't have a lot of personalization and customization in our app right now. So we suggest take one, focus on that. What would you design for this persona, launch and see what happens. then iterate. Maybe you move on to another persona if it's not the right fit. But down the line, if we want to design for all three, then we need to start building these customizable experiences. So maybe the speech recognition is really harsh for some people who care about their accent or pronunciation, or somebody who doesn't care and just wants to, play around. It's not harsh at all, and they can choose that for themselves. But we're just not there yet. So we have to take the reality of our product and build one option for the people that we choose.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say, I think that about does it. You've been a really incredible audience. And Rachel, thank you very much. Christina, thank you for being the guest of the guest speaker.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you,
Thanks,
guys.
Christina.
Thank you, Rachel. That was
Absolutely
amazing.
amazing.
And thank you,
Really
Christina.
appreciate it.
And we'll do another one of these.
Thank you, guys.
Okay.
Absolutely.